Hello, I'm Dr. Vaijanta Anand. I'm Associate Professor with Nirmala Niketan College of Social Work, which is affiliated to University of Mumbai. And today I'm going to talk about Principles of Community Practice, which is the title of the lesson, and which is part of the course Community Organization, which is again part of the subject Social Work Education. So let us look at some of the information which I would like to give you with regard to this. This particular module helps in understanding general concepts and meaning of community practice. Earlier we had looked at community in the value framework, but this basically looks at community practice. What are the principles involved in community practice? How do you understand the universal principles of community practice and application aspect of it. We will be also looking at applications of principles in promoting such social justice, and also looking at consequences of addressing the consequences of injustice and oppression. When we say principles of community practice, what do we mean by that? What do we mean by that is, principles are universally accepted or universally applicable for fulfilling the professional workers' mandate to promote social justice, which are embodied in the ideals of the profession, correct? So during work, community work practitioners, all of us who work in the community, what are we doing? We are basically dealing with injustice which is meted out to the people. We are talking about, we are dealing with victimization and we are dealing with oppression. Okay, so in such cases, the practitioners are required to internalize the principles of community practice, which basically upholds social justice and which is basically looking at human rights. What is the significance of the principle? Okay, the principles of community practice, it acts like a guide. It acts like a guideline when you are practicing. So these principles provide a moral and ethical legitimacy for fieldwork practice, because when you are working in the community, you are roaming around in the slums and you are wondering, what exactly guides me? Should I talk? Should I not talk? Should I interact or not interact? How far can I interact? How close can I get to the community? These basically guidelines helps you to determine what exactly is the framework in which I as a community practitioner need to situate myself. Okay, so respecting every human being regardless of individual differences, variation, and looking at their contribution to the society is something which is basic, which we need to look at. Okay, basically when you are talking about principles, you can look at NASW Code of Ethics. You can also look at preamble of International Code of Ethics, which basically have been framed very long time back. Like NASW Code of Ethics has come in 1990, but prior to that was the preamble of the International Code of Ethics. So let's look at preamble of it. But I must say that we need to adapt it to whichever country or whichever community we would be working in. The principles of community organization can be understood and generalized, as guiding rules. So one is rule of right action. What action is right action? And a value judgment as to what is sound or good community organization. So you are basically talking about whatever action happens in the community because of your intervention, whether it's a right action. And the second is, in terms of value judgment, what is the sound, good community organization? That is what you are looking at. So the principles are basically, you have to keep in mind that they are aligned with the general principles of democracy, self-reliance, cooperation, partnership, transparency, and sustainability. And they're shaped by an understanding of the social forces, whereby you understand various empirical work which have happened in the group and community, and the knowledge base which is basically providing us an understanding of the communities. In the earlier lesson, when we were looking at value framework, we were referring to Murray Ross. This time we will be looking at Arthur Denham, who has written again a lot on community organization, which is a good guiding kind of book which we can refer to whenever we are talking about community practice. He has written a lot in his book, related to community organization in 1958. He is talking about 28 suggested principles of community organization. So 28 suggested principles can be grouped under 7 headings. Let us look at these 7 headings. Again, like Murray Ross, Dunham also talks about democracy and social welfare. He talks about community roots for community programs, because many times what happens is you have community program which do not have community roots. You might have toilets constructed which you may feel that they are all suitable, they are there in the places and you have built very good toilets, but people do not feel that they belong to them. So obviously there is no accountability, there is no sense of belonging. So within a given time, either the toilets are, they remain unused, or they are broken into or pilferage happens. Basically because you have not built these services with community roots. Okay, so one has to have citizens understanding, there has to be a support and participation. You cannot build, like after earthquake, there is a tendency to go and build houses. And then you land up seeing these houses being used as cattle sheds, and people are staying outside in the open. Why? Basically, when you're developing these kind of programs, there has not been any kind of participation from the people, and there have not been any kind of community roots. You have built up houses for the people who have lot of cattle, and they need cattle sheds, and or the communities basically are using fuel for cooking and all that, which needs open space. So since you have not taken all this into consideration, they were not included in designing the houses, these houses remain again unused, and people are again living outside, building their own structures which according to you may not be houses. There has to be cooperation, because unless there is cooperation, community organization cannot happen. You also talk about social welfare programs, but one needs to talk about adequacy in terms of distribution. Whenever you're talking about social welfare programs, are they reaching out to right people? Are they reaching out to everybody? And are you only talking about reaching out to the people who are facing problem, or are you engaging in prevention, which we had earlier talked about, that one needs to also get engaged in preventing the problems from occurring again and again. So, like I gave example, if you have built toilets and you think that open defecation as an issue you are resolving just by building toilets, and those toilets get broken up, the issue of open defecation will keep happening again and again. So that is something which you need to understand. So all of these 7 which are like aspects which again can be further elaborated, needs to be kept in mind when you're talking about community practice. Okay. He also specified, along with Dunham, we need to also go back to Ross. Ross in 1967, when he was talking about community organization, he has specified, certain principles, okay, like, fundamental ideas with regard to initiation and continuation of community organization, okay. What are these? Whenever you are working in the community, you are looking at discontent with the existing condition. People are not happy, okay, and there is a need for initiating or developing or initiating some kind of association, a feeling that this community situation needs to be changed, it is wrong, and something new or something different has to come in. So that is the common motivation. Does the community feel that? If they feel that, then only they will be able to overcome the problem. Okay, so now when you're talking about discontent, it should be focused and channelized into organization rather than remaining at the discontent level, which leads to probably conflictual kind of situation with no solution. Okay, so when you're looking at discontent, then the discontent is transformed into community organization, which includes planning, which takes into consideration that what are the specific problems people have. Okay, so this content is focused, and it looks at certain aspects which basically can be looked for in terms of providing some kind of solution which emerges from the people itself. Okay, for example, suppose the discontent is there is no water, and the village community is talking about no water because there is one particular water tanker which gets empty, or there is no water coming out of it after 6 months. So the idea by the community, by the government officers, may be that build another tanker. Okay, but one might realize, if you sit with the community and look at the discontent, because discontent is where this tanker is going to be built. Will the people who are marginalized, will they have access to this community tanker or the tanker which is being built? But the solution may be very, very simple, like it has happened in one of the villages where community practice, where the people were working, that the tap which was there on the tanker was in the middle of the tank. So the tap, as soon as it was lowered, the position of the tap when it was lowered, people had access to entire tank, and which actually resolved the problem of water for whole year. So there was no need of actually building another tanker. But if you do not have this kind of a dialogue or process whereby people bring in their discontent and they also bring in reasons for the discontent, you will not be able to work. So that is the principle, that we need to have some kind of initiation of community organization which is sustainable, which is based in the people and where people are engaged in providing solution. The association, or when you bring people together, they must involve leader, but leaders can be formal as well as informal. If you work with the construction workers, the initially people who would come ahead as leaders would be the exploitative, the agents, actually, the people who are basically bringing these groups of construction workers. They will face you and they will tell you they are the leaders. Are they the leaders identified by the people, or accepted by the community, or are they the leaders because they have promoted themselves as leaders? This kind of leadership will not lead the community anywhere. So one need to look at what exactly is the association which is emerging, how democratic it is, what exactly is the process in which it becomes acceptable by everybody in the community. So one has to probably wait out, or see that the people feel encouraged or empowered enough to choose their own leaders who are effective, and not because they fear some people or not because there are power dynamics involved in it. So this would include activities which encourages this kind of functioning, where people are able to bring out their emotions, they are able to look at their own members, and which also reinforces their loyalty to those goals, more towards the goals, or more to the value of the issue of unity among the people, rather than choosing somebody just because that person is there or is willing to take the leadership. When you're talking about association, it basically seeks to utilize and utilize the manifest and latent goodwill which exists in the community. So what are you basically doing? That you are looking at community leaders, you're basically looking at community leaders who can be utilized. Why do you want to look at community leaders? Because they basically help us to understand what community needs, or they are the way in which you can communicate with community groups. They are the people who probably will make us understand what are the real and felt needs or concerns of the people. So the wrong community leaders may not be able to reach us to the marginalized or the exploited groups. So it becomes very imperative that your association with the people is guided by reaching out to the excluded groups, and not just by becoming acquainted with the community as a whole. So, what is the methodology? Through this association, basically you're seeking support from the people for implementing programs or developing an understanding of the community itself. So any association, it must develop active and effective lines of communication. So these lines of communication needn't be only leader specific. It should be a via way in which you can reach out to smaller groups. It might be like, you might say hello to the community leader who is self-proclaimed leader, but slowly you are able to set him aside and develop forays into, the marginalized groups, so that you may not need this particular leader. You are able to develop leaders among the marginalized groups who are able to face the said leader and are able to bring transformative changes in the community. The association should seek to support and strengthen the groups which it brings together in cooperation, or in a cooperative work, because people have to come together. That would mean a community which has diverse groups. Each group needs to represent itself in the, when they come together, and that representation happens if you are able to associate yourself with different kind of groups. Okay, so association should be flexible in its organizational procedure without disrupting its regular decision making routines. So the opportunity to use a variety of methods in undertaking proceedings of the association is very important. Okay, so association should develop a proper pace of its work, because the association need to first be representative of various groups in the community, and it should have some kind of a routine, some kind of establishment of objectives which are agreed upon by everybody, and this pace of work will determine how fast or what would be the process which all of them will get engaged in achieving particular kind of goals. As Murray Ross says, the association should seek to develop effective leaders. So association should not be formed by the leaders. Actually, association should lead to development of effective leaders. So association must develop strength, stability and prestige in the community. So it might be a community based organization which has been formed of, or it might be even a self-help group. There are lots of examples in India when you are looking at various kind of villages where self-help groups have come together and have been able to play a very important role in decision making at the Gram Panchayat level or at the local democratic processes, basically because they have been able to get prestige in the community, they have strength and ability, and the leadership has emerged from among them instead of leaders which are already there because of some or the other political context. So this is very important, because this basically association, which has support in the community, which is participative and inclusive, becomes the symbol of community cooperation. Siddiqui is another person who has evolved a set of 8 principles to guide community organization practitioners. What are these? One is principle of specific objective. What Siddiqui says is that, we need to have specific objectives, of working with different client groups on one hand and formulating specific community oriented objectives. Because one may start working through school with the children. So you might have, okay, I'm working with, trying to bring these children back to the school. But that requires that, you need to tackle the issues which are faced by the community. Maybe, the school is not friendly, or maybe the community is not feeling the school is friendly. So when you're working on these kind of issues, you're working at the individual child which is not going to the school, but at the same time, you're also looking at what are the specific problems related to the community and developing your objective. So that is principle of specific objective. You're looking at principle of planning. It implies developing a blueprint for entire work which need to be undertaken in terms of programs, finance, resource requirement, personnel requirements, space, etc. But many times when you look at these kind of principles, you have to keep in mind that it's not you alone who should be developing this whole blueprint. It's not the organization which you belong to will develop all these things. The community participation becomes imperative because people will be sitting with you developing a blueprint for the entire work, or you might develop a program which is unsuitable for worker. Like in HIV AIDS, you might come up with entire set of informative pamphlets and things like that, and you realize that you are working with various kinds of groups, and they speak a different language, or they are not even literate, okay, and they are not able to read whatever you have printed out. So all that efforts which you have made will be useless unless the community gets engaged in developing these programs. The principle of people's participation, it goes along with a principle of planning, because unless and until people participate, when I talk about participation, it does not mean that they give their point of view. It would mean that they feel they are the stakeholders. They are sitting with you and telling you how to strategize and how to work. Like, with the construction workers, many times you may feel that you need to work on a particular issue, but the construction workers may feel that no, I don't think you need to work on this issue. Let's work on something which is much more meaningful. Work on health. Our children are, being born on the construction sites, and, our women are suffering most of the time because they deliver the babies. So maternal mortality, infant mortality is very high. So when you're talking about wages and when you're talking about discrimination, they would say that, do not work on that. Please see to it that our women are able to deliver in a safer kind of environment, and they are able to have access to health services. So one need to include people's participation, and there has to be principle of intergroup approach where the groups can come together and they are able to fight, make a wider kind of association which will be able to address the issues of the community. Principle of democratic functioning, it needless to say, it goes along with the participation. That would mean that every single group in the community has a right to express their point of view. So there has to be a kind of a process of coming together to a consensus or collaborative or coming to a conclusion with the principle of democratic functioning. So there has to be, one has to understand that, democratic functioning can happen only if there is a flexibility. So when you have flexibility in approach to organization, there is no rigidity in your understanding of the community organization. You are able to accommodate people with varied abilities to function effectively. So if you are talking about children's education, sometimes even including children in decision making with regard to school resources or educational resources will lead to better kind of functioning of the education system. Principle of optimum utilization of indigenous resources, it includes human resources, it includes voluntary labor, like in India, when you're talking about water issues in Rajasthan, Rajendra Singh, who is Magsaysay Award person, he believes a lot in voluntary labor. So he never enters the community unless and until the whole community decides that this is the place where we would go for water conservation, and we all will contribute voluntarily, provide labor in building up small kinds of check dams and things like that. So community volunteers and the physical space which is required for the community organization to come up, all that is basically, it needs to come from within the communities, because otherwise you will be an outsider who would come for some time, work there and go away. The principle of cultural orientation, because the community organization practitioner needs to be accustomed with regard to traditions and values, because some of the things which you initially may look at it as superstitions, or they are something which you don't believe in, but people believe in it a lot. So one need to understand that these customs and these rituals and these traditions are something which are part of the community living, and you need to respect it. You need to get oriented towards these things. So following the festivals, respecting the festivals, making your presence feel felt by the community in these festivals, looking at rituals related to death, being with the community when these kind of crisis comes in are very important when you are working in the community. Application of the principles can help the community worker to achieve professionalism in practice, but when you're talking about achieving professionalism in the practice, you need to keep in mind that community organization is means and it's not an end. You have organized the people or communities to meet certain needs. It does not mean that it's a full stop when community organization comes up. And also community organization should promote community solidarity, a practice of democracy which will sustain itself even when you go away from the community. So those are the things whereby community is able to identify discrimination, segregation, not just when you are present but also on its own as a practice which will be sustainable. What we need to look at is clear identification of the community, because we need to understand what exactly is the community we are identifying, because the entire community becomes the concern of the practitioner. So how do you do it? You have to go for fact finding and need assessment. Programs initiated, developed or modified or terminated, all of that should be very much rooted in the needs of the community. So unless and until you are able to assess the needs of the community, you will not be able to initiate any program, you cannot modify it, and neither can you terminate it, because you will never understand whether you have actually met the needs of the community. One thing which is also very important when you are talking about community practices, identifying and mobilizing the local resources. It does not make sense bringing resources from outside when the resources are already available in the community itself. So one needs to look at, if you're creating new or additional services, one needs to look at what is available. Have we utilized fully whatever is available? So you might develop some kind of socio-economic program for the women, and you may feel that okay, they should all need to be trained in certain skills. Okay, so and you might bring a person from outside without realizing that traditionally actually they are skilled in many of the aspects. So if you're talking about textile related issues, okay, they themselves may be skilled tailors, or they might be very good in needle work. So bringing somebody from outside to teach them needlework won't make sense. So you need to basically identify what are the basic resources which are available in the community, and based on that probably programs can be developed. And for this, participative planning is required, basically because the more people participate, the more meaningful the implementation of program would be, and the cycle of implementation and evaluation can continue, and more programs can emerge from the community itself. Many times participation is people come for the meeting and they are there. You are the one who are talking, you are putting across your point of view. That's not participation. The participation has to be active. That means when you're talking about democracy or democratic principle, it would mean that people are basically feeling that they have a primary stake in its result. If a program is getting implemented, it has to be sustained, and they should be able to look at basically that it's going to impact their community living. Okay, so the community's right of self-determination needs to be respected. So if people are saying that this is something we would like to have, then it needs to be respected. So community worker is basically concerned with facilitating people's expression and leadership to achieve the goals of the community organization. So if people are saying that we would like to have this particular kind of services initially because it serves some of the needs which are urgent. So you might not feel those are urgent, but if the community feels those are urgent, we need to basically look at those services. Voluntary cooperation, as earlier we have said that community organization is effective only if people are voluntarily coming together and cooperating. Okay, there is a sense of acceptance when there is a voluntary cooperation. Okay, so there has to be a spirit of cooperation rather than competition, and there has to be some sense of coordination of efforts. Many times what happens is you might have you might land up encouraging competition among different subgroups in the community, thinking that that will a kind of enhance the speed of the implementation of the program, but that becomes detrimental if that competition leads to conflictual situation. So one should see to it that the sense of cooperation is encouraged instead of competition or conflict. One has to recognize the involvement of the indigenous leader, because as there might be political leaders, there might be leaders who are probably there because they are head of the Gram Panchayat or because they have power structure, but indigenous leader would mean that among the people a leader emerges who may not be actually a leader per se, if you are going to identify, but they are the leaders who are accepted. They might be a quiet person, they might be somebody everybody basically are happy to confide in or share their problems, and these are the leaders who probably will emerge if you have worked with marginalized groups. Focus is on bringing out leadership from the marginalized group. One must avoid the use of authority or any kind of compulsion, because when there is a compulsion, people's cooperation and people's participation does not happen. Okay, the dynamic and flexible nature of the program and services is also important, because for example, if you feel that construction workers require skill-based training program, and you're running a skill-based training program in the evening on the construction site, and suddenly after a week you realize that the work the speed of work has increased because suddenly the cement has come in, and workers are not available in the evening because they are working in a double shift. So one need to be flexible, and one might have to postpone the completion of the modules of the skill development program and see to it that it gets completed, but keeping it flexible enough to accommodate these kind of situations. Okay. Also, it is important to have participatory evaluation, because just implementing program does not achieve its goal. People have to assess it. When you're talking about participative evaluation, you're talking about people who are availing these services or programs, or people who have together developed these programs need to sit back and look at the program and say, was it effective? Did it achieve the goals? If not, can we make changes? Can we develop something else? Has it accomplished the goals we have set about? Only then programs will be effective. So, in conclusion, what are we saying? That principles of community organization are basically telling us that participation of the people, keeping the core values of the practice of social work is very, very important. They are the guiding rules, but they tell us that they are the expression of these principles basically help us help any kind of students to do the community work, to fulfill their own not only their own understanding of community work, but it is also the need that every community should strive for just and equitable kind of functioning, which will lead to a just and equitable society. So again, it would be great if you can look at the text. It will give a much more clearer picture, and it would be also helpful to look at Arthur Dunham, Murray Ross and Sindiki, because these books will basically help you to go much more deeper, and which will be able to guide you further in your community practice. Thank you.